Joining me to discuss all of this in a broader context is Phillip Blond, former advisor to David Cameron and director of Res Publica think tank. So tell me, are these just snowflakes whinging? Is this the way politics has always been and always needs to be? Or, I'll put this to you, many millions of people who voted for Brexit hadn't engaged with politics for, forever, in many cases. They were actually hoping for something better than this, weren't they?
I think they were. I think that what this is quite interesting. It's like a Me Too moment. So this has always gone on. I've heard countless stories, I'm sure you have, MPs being threatened when the whips know they're having an affair, that they say, we'll brief you to the newspapers. That's the job of the whips. They essentially collect blackmail material.
The little black book.
Yeah. And that's how they control. What I think is interesting, and I've heard of direct threats to MPs over the last 10 years. It's the norm. What I think is interesting about this is you have an MP that you wouldn't expect coming out and say, actually, you know what, this is unacceptable, and linking it to funding for activities in his constituency for the benefits of his constituents. It's a new moment. And what I think is happening in the country generally is that human beings become moral when things break down, when things don't make sense. And morality is a curious thing because you can't explain why it exists, but it's a kind of fundamental survival mechanism where people say, actually, we all have to live by norms. And if the norms are breached, then what's after that is unacceptable. So I think this is the redrawing of a new political demand on politics. And I think we're seeing this with COVID and the behaviour in Number 10. I think we're seeing this with all of these revelations. And I think it marks something new from people, which is actually we do want something different. And this is no longer acceptable.
So is the objection to the Downing Street parties to increasing concern about Boris Johnson himself as leader, this is about morality? Yeah,
I mean, I think people voted for Brexit out of a sense of solidarity, that the liberal consensus that has been followed largely since the 60s by both left and right has essentially atomised people, destroyed collective bonds, and essentially taken apart working class communities and working class families. And in large part, the vote for Brexit was on a national basis, a demand for solidarity. Now, when that happens, that is accompanied by a moral demand that we matter too. Our codes matter. And what we're seeing is that elites generally, when they become disconnected from the collective kind of legitimacy, become dysfunctional. And that moral demand is actually the expression of a need for a new politics. Not a moral in the sense of puritanical, but a moral in the sense of, oh, for goodness sake, we need something shared that is
the cynicism yesterday with which Christian Wakeford just crosses the floor and sits with Labour, a man who publicly had said that MPs that defect should hold themselves open to the public and doesn't call a by-election. It's all part of it, isn't it?
Well, Churchill crossed the floor. So the point, I think, is I imagine he's in quite a lonely place because MPs who cross the floor are hated by those they've left and are not exactly welcomed by those they join. So I kind of feel sorry for him in a way. And the interesting question isn't, I think, to impugn a man's motives, but to say, why do you feel he had to do it? Now, you could be cynical and say, oh, he was in a tiny majority and only Labour can win the seat. But I don't believe that. I generally think people try to operate out of the deepest moral concerns, particularly somebody who makes a sacrifice like that. So I think that we should look on this
was it a sacrifice? Is saving his own political skin a sacrifice?
Well, we don't know if it'll save his own political skin.
But he thinks it is.
I generally think that you get a lot out of the world if you think the best of people. Because I'm with Orwell on this, ordinary British people are decent and they want to act decently. Yeah. So this is kind of part of my objection to kind of the whole woke culture. You know, we're one of the greatest countries for racial integration, for looking past things that don't matter. English decency, British decency is real. And so I think we should carry that forward into how we judge others, to be honest.
Does Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and the methods that he's adopted over the last couple of years, does it fit with that sense of British decency?
Look, I think Boris Johnson has virtues that it's worth speaking about. And Boris Johnson's great virtue is that he's not a market, austerity-fixated Tory who just wants to serve the southeast of England. And the point about Boris Johnson is I think almost everybody who voted for him knew what they were voting for. They knew that they weren't voting for somebody.
Well, they weren't voting for the Pope, were they? No.
Well, quite. And so then the question is what did people think they were voting for? They thought they were voting for somebody who might give a damn about them, might reorient politics around them. And if you want to injunct Boris Johnson, I never think you should injunct people for personal behaviour. You should injunct them for, how can I put it, for what they haven't done. But
they're not judging him for that. They're not judging him for that. What they're saying out there is he was caught attending a party that clearly was a party, and he could have put his hands up.
But he's never done that.
Didn't. No, but the point is they're now thinking he's lied to us. And that's serious for him.
That is serious for him. And you can mark his fall from that. But the point is that is in his character to obfuscate charges, and it's worked for him. This is a modus operandi.
Until now?
Until now. So what we're seeing then is, remember I said earlier, morality arises when something has changed. So what has changed in our country? And I think Brexit was part of that change. That change was we're not taking it anymore. We're not taking being repudiated, being discriminated against. We're not taking powerful minorities, essentially undermining majorities, undermining shared norms. So what you're seeing here, and I think we should welcome this, is the rise of a new collective morality that says, actually, if we're all in this together, then we all have to be in this together. And what's interesting about that, just to take this into policy, is to say, well, we don't have a set of policy offers that look after everybody in this country. We don't have a set of policy offers that recognises that class is the biggest penalty in this country. We've imported all this garbage from America that it doesn't apply to this country. And very small elites are using that and marginal groups to say this is the issue, but it isn't. The real shame, the real tragedy of Boris Johnson's premiership is he could have been the Disraeli of the 21st century. He could have been the person who reorients the Conservative Party around the concerns of successful people in the southeast to a national party that cares for all of its citizens. And the point is that was a promise. That was a promise worth voting for, I think.
And it feels like a London chumocracy a little bit. Philip, come back and see us again soon. Thank you for giving us your thoughts on all of this.